Good evening, friends. This is Brian, the host of the Your Favorite Blockhead podcast, and I thank you for taking the time to tune into today's show of My Stuttering Life. The host, Pedro, is going to inform you, entertain you, but even educate you on what it means to have a podcast or to go through life with what he calls 80% fluency. Yes, you are listening to a podcaster who stutters. You are going on a great journey with your host, Pedro, and I encourage you to sit back, relax, and enjoy it, and let's get on with the show.
What's up, guys? This is Pedro from My Stuttering Life, where you will hear the good, the bad, the very ugly. We're gonna laugh, we're gonna cry, but through it all, just know that you are not alone. So, let's get started. This is episode number 90, and my special guest is Christopher Constantino. Christopher lives in Tallahassee with his wife, Megan, and son, Augustine. He is a speech-language pathologist and assistant professor at Florida State University. He teaches stuttering and counseling. He researches ways to improve the embodied and social experiences of stuttering. He co-edited the book Stammering Pride and Prejudice. Chris is also a co-host on the StutterTalk podcast. I am honored to have him as a guest with me on the My Stuttering Life podcast. Welcome, Christopher Constantino.
Thanks for having me, Pedro. I'm excited to talk with you.
Thank you, sir. This is a huge honor. We have a lot of topics to cover, so let's get started.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
So, do you remember when you first began to stutter?
I don't have a first memory of stuttering. All of my memories back then are rather vague and fuzzy, but I do remember sort of the time in my life and sort of what was going on. I remember that I started stuttering sort of on the late end of normal. I was probably 6-ish, maybe first grade. And I was already in speech therapy for my pronunciation. So I was in speech therapy for articulation. And I remember it was sometime during then that I started stuttering, which isn't too out of the ordinary. And I remember therapy sort of just switching gears to start addressing some of that. But I have no strong memories of stuttering until I'm an adolescent and till like middle school time.
Does it run in your family? Are there any other family members who stutter?
So that's an interesting question because it didn't run in my family until me, and now it does. So what I mean by that is I don't have any aunts or uncles or grandparents that I'm aware of that stutter. Neither of my parents do, but I'm the oldest of 4 boys, and so I started stuttering, and 2 of my other brothers do also. So how I like to say it is I didn't have anybody in my family that stuttered, but they both did, right? Because they came after me.
Right. You were talking about speech therapy when you were in the first grade. How long did you have speech therapy, and do you think it was helpful?
So I had therapy both in school and privately at one of the local hospital clinics from when I was maybe kindergarten through till I think fifth grade, maybe fourth or fifth grade. And like I said, I was primarily, I had delayed speech and language. And so I was primarily working on that. And then that resolved. And then I was primarily working on my stuttering. I have no, once again, I have no strong memories of therapy from that time. I remember my therapists. Or at least the ones from the hospital. I don't have any strong memories of my school therapists. I remember liking therapy. I remember playing games and having fun. But whether it was helpful or if it wasn't helpful, I don't know. I do know that the reason I stopped going is because as I got older and, you know, you get more socially aware and whatnot, I didn't particularly like getting pulled out of class to go to therapy. And so we stopped when I was either in fifth or sixth grade, not because I had stopped stuttering, but just because I didn't want to go anymore.
See, and that was the worst part for me because I completely empathize because back in my day, because I am a lot older than you are, Chris. Back in my day, they would call your name out over the PAs, and so the entire school knew, oh, Pedro has to go to the office for speech therapy. And I'm talking, they're all just looking at me. I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. And so, yeah, I had wished they found another way, a quieter way, a more private way. But no, back in my day, they had those huge speakers in every room and everyone knew that Pedro had speech therapy once a week. So yeah, I completely empathize with you.
So how long were you in therapy for?
12 years in school. And then I went when I was in undergrad and graduate school. And then I also had it in the U.S. Air Force. Okay. So so what you're hearing right now is 20 years of really hard work.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point for listeners, right? Is that whenever you're hearing a person who stutters speaking, you're hearing not only is it just a snapshot in time, but you're also hearing the person's history, right? Like stuttering, I think, like captures and holds on to not only all of our like avoidance behaviors and our struggles and all the things we do to try not to stutter is manifested in each and every one of our moments of stuttering, but also as we work to untangle all of that, if you're hearing somebody stuttering easier or maybe less intensely, sometimes that's also, like decades in the making.
Right, because I can't tell you how many times, Chris, that I have been told, you're faking it. There's nothing wrong with you. You're fine. And it's like, you just don't know.
Right. I empathize with that too. Not only does it go up and down still, but like talking used to be so difficult. Right? It used to be so hard, and even if it's not hard currently, that doesn't take away from your past experiences.
Right. You are 100% correct. And so, I just have to educate them because right now I am in education mode. That way, if anybody should have a comment, or a colorful quirk, I can just respond by educating them. So the more you know.
Right.
And so you were talking about your school days. Talk about high school, because in high school you have a lot of pressures, and there's peer pressure, and you have the hormones going and everything. And then on top of that, guess what? You have a stutter. And so how did you handle the turbulent high school life?
I, I think I handled it the best that I could. At in the moment, I think my primary coping mechanisms were denial and acting out. I think for the most part, I just tried to ignore the fact that I stuttered as best as I could. I really didn't like talking about it. I sort of assumed that it was just going to go away eventually. Like whenever I thought about the future, if I thought about college or working or getting married, that future had to be a fluent future, because I just couldn't handle thinking about myself still stuttering and trying to go on job interviews and all of that stuff. And so I think in terms of like how I was integrating stuttering into my sense of self, I really wasn't integrating it very well. I was never able to pass as fluent or be a covert stutterer. So, my stutter was fairly obvious, I think, to everybody I was talking to, but I still tried my hardest to keep people who I thought didn't know that I stuttered in the dark about it. It was like I had two running lists of, these are people who know that I stutter, these are people who don't. And the primary way of keeping people in the they don't know I stutter list was just to barely talk to them. Right? I just wouldn't. I would really censor myself around people who didn't know. Really try to keep my talking to a minimum. And when I said acting out, I think there was a concern of mine that I wanted people to realize that I still had a personality, and that I was intelligent, and that I could be funny, and that I could talk. And so I think I just a lot of lounging around, getting into the trouble, just doing random things just to, I didn't feel like I could communicate very well. And so I still wanted to interact with my peers and make them laugh and draw attention to myself, but I was limited in the ways that I could do that. And so I probably did more risky things than I would have done otherwise.
Did you ever join groups in high school to, just kind of fit in? Because, being that one kid who has a stutter, no one wants to, really hang out with that kid. And so, thankfully, in high school, the drama club welcomed me in. And then also, I was a yearbook photographer. And so I told myself I need to, just have at least some human interaction, because throughout my entire school life, I was isolated because, no one wanted to hang around the kid who spit and sputtered. And I ate lunch in the janitor's closet. I ate lunch behind the school because, no one wanted to hang out with me. And so in high school, thankfully, the the drama club welcomed me in, and these are a group of amazing, positive people, and so that was my saving grace for me. Did you ever join any groups in your high school to help cope?
I certainly had a small group of friends and was involved in various things, but I don't know that I ever associated any of those with my stuttering. I played sports. I was on the crew team. I rowed, and so I had social connections and friends through that. And the city that I'm from, Poughkeepsie, New York. It's a small city in upstate New York. Had a pretty thriving local music scene at the time. I don't know what it's like anymore. It's been decades since I've been in high school. But there was always local concerts to go to over the weekends, and people there, and I felt socially satisfied. I don't think I felt like I think I felt like I wasn't able to talk to all the people that I wanted to, right? Especially like girls I was attracted to, or even just people who I wasn't intimidated by because they were popular, or I wanted to get to know them better. But I don't know that I felt alone per se. I think I was fortunately, I was busy enough, and I had enough going on that I wasn't like seeking extra things to get involved in.
My mom has the best quote ever. Busy's good. And I truly believe that.
Yeah. I think that's very wise, actually, that there's a certain peace that comes with knowing what you're supposed to be doing in a given moment, right? So I'm supposed to be going to the crew practice, or I'm supposed to be going to this show, I'm supposed to be doing this or that. It's when we're like not sure what to do with ourselves that we start having those existential crises.
Oh, yes. I've been there, and you're so correct. Okay, so do you have any advice for parents and teachers with regards to children who stutter?
So, yeah, I guess just vague advice, like general advice is that stuttering's not dangerous, right? Like the child isn't gonna get hurt from uh, stuttering. Just because they're speaking and they're stuttering, that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything you need to do about it, right? Other than patiently listen and engage with the child. I think something I have to talk with parents a lot about is, obviously they love the children and they want to do what's best for them, and they see them struggling to speak, and like they want to do something always. And this creates this situation where the child is aware that every time I talk, my mother worries about me, right? And so not only is there this pressure of, I really don't want to stutter, but also this additional pressure of, I don't want to freak out mom every time I speak, or like, I don't want dad to be anxious every time I'm talking. And so I would say the number one thing is, like, it's okay if your child is stuttering. It's okay if they're struggling a lot. Just give them time and space. And obviously, you want them struggling less, right? I think that's where therapy comes in. But you don't have to be their therapist 24/7. And it's okay just to listen and just let them stutter. And I would give the same advice to the teachers that, the presence of stuttering doesn't mean anything's wrong in this situation. It's just how the person speaks.
That is great advice. And I wish, I had that, growing up, because, there was no collaboration, nobody was talking to anybody. And so, I just had to muddle through, all of the, practices and techniques in speech therapy, and the, teachers, God bless them, but, they didn't have a clue, as how to handle Pedro. And so they would always call on me. And so I would raise my hand before I was to read, and then I would go hang out in the boys' restroom. So,
right, spend a lot of quality time in that restroom, huh?
Let me tell you, Chris, I spent more time in the boys' restroom all through school, in college, at many of my jobs. Yeah, it's.
Did you have a favorite restroom?
Well, back in my day, in 1979, 80, we didn't have the best of restroom facilities. They were cold, and but I knew that I am not able to read out loud, and so I'll just hang out in the restroom for however long that I need to, and then I'll just go back and they would just carry on in the room. So for me, this was all about survival.
Mm-hmm. When you were in drama club, what was your role in the club?
Well, these amazing drama kids, they were extremely positive. They were there to help me, to support me, to lift me up. And so partly I handled the lighting, and then partly they had me in plays. And so here is a head scratcher, Chris. During a play, the character that 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 I was playing did not have a stutter. And so therefore Pedro did not have a stutter. And so I would just carry on and do all my lines, and the funny part is the people in the audience, they knew me and their mouths were open, and just, I mean, what I imagine them thinking is, how can he do that if he can't even talk? But the moment that I walked off the stage, I was no longer that character. I was Pedro. And what does Pedro do? Yeah. And, life goes on.
So I'm curious about like as a teenager, the psychological impact of all of that. Was that like, did that feel really good that you were able to show people, I can still speak, like I'm not like I have a voice, or was it frustrating and crazy making that in this one situation you could speak so easily, and in this other situation it was so difficult?
Oh, that is a very good question, Chris. I would say 50-50. Because being on stage, I never thought in a million years that I could ever do that. I mean, growing up, people told me I was slow, that I was stupid, that I had a form of mental retardation, and that I would never get a job. I would never get married. I would never have a career. All that I was good for was to apply for disability and get a check every month. And being on stage with these awesome drama kids who were there to help me, lift me up, and just be positive, that was a huge impact on me, because I never had that. I never had that growing up. Then when I walked off stage, well, there goes Pedro again. Why can't I do, talking on the phone, but I can hop on stage and do a 1-minute monologue? I mean, yeah, it's frustrating. Then again, it was a wonderful experience.
Were you confident each time you got on stage because of your past ability to do it, or was it like a psychological wrestling match every time?
Well, during the rehearsals, I 100% immersed myself into that character. And so whatever character traits that he had, that's what I had. And so I would hop on stage. I mean, I would be funny, I would get angry, I would dance a jig and, carry a tune. And once that was over with, that was it. That character is all done. The play is over, and it's back to Pedro.
Pedro, that's really interesting, because it's almost like you're saying you weren't worried about stuttering because your character didn't stutter. Pedro did, and you weren't Pedro in that moment.
Right. Doing a play, learning all of those lines and rehearsing and practicing, day after day after day. Once I hopped on stage, it it was an amazing experience because I'm doing what every person in my life had told me that I could not.
Was that
I mean, so,
empowering?
extremely. I mean, a huge head scratcher, like, huh? But yes, extremely empowering because, that's when, that's when I knew that I, quote unquote, fit in.
Do your friends from the drama club know the impact that they had on you?
No, no, I don't think so. No, during my school years, I pretty much kept to my self, and crowds. I have a hard time with crowds, but I told myself, um, they wanted me in, and so I am not going to disappoint. I will work as hard as I can. I will do whatever I can because these people believe in me. These people are here. They are all around me, and they're telling me, "You can do this. You can do this. If you need help, we are right here for you." And that is an amazing feeling.
Yeah, it really is, and it's also that like you're part of this greater um, body, right? Because you're not putting on the play by yourself. It's a synergistic relationship where the better you do, the better the play does, and the better your the other members of the drama club do, the better the play does. So everybody's on the same team, wanting the best for everybody else.
Right. We were a team of like 20, and you know to be amongst these positive uh, uh, individuals. I mean, that was kind of like a drug to me because I wanted more. And during the plays, we would do one act plays, and so we did. I think it was like Larry Mc uh, Larry McMurtry. Um, he wrote all those books back in the 1980s, and we did a one act play that went to state. And so that was really awesome. That's when I got my Letterman jacket. And that was huge because I made sure that my jacket was the most pressed, that it was clean, that my pins were on perfectly. That jacket was everything to me because that told me this is what I can do. And that jacket still hangs in my closet 30 years later.
That's awesome.
So job-wise, Chris, did your stutter, did you ever feel like, this is hard to measure, but, did you ever feel that you were discriminated because of your stutter?
So, not in my current field. So I'm in speech language pathology. I'm a therapist and I work as a professor at Florida State. But, I've had lots of different jobs over the course of my life, and I've definitely left interviews. Once again, I can't prove this, but I've definitely left interviews feeling like the reason I was not chosen was because of my stuttering. And the reason I feel confident saying that is when I was in graduate school, I worked to pay the bills, and I did all kinds of stuff from landscaping to bartending to temp work, and in those temp work jobs you do anything under the sun. And I remember interviewing for bartending positions where I would get to the interview and the person interviewing me would be so grateful that I had come because they were a brand new restaurant, and they couldn't get anybody over, and they were just desperate to open that weekend, and all my past experience looked really good on paper, and and then thinking like I got this in the bag, right? Like there's no reason why they wouldn't hire me here. Like I have experience, they're desperate, blah blah blah. And then like stuttering a lot in the interview and leaving and never getting that phone call and just wondering, if they were so desperate, why didn't they give me a call? And of course, I can't prove that was discrimination. But, it's something you always think about, right? And I've certainly talked to people in my research and in my therapy experience where people were explicitly told that they weren't getting the job because they stuttered, or they were being moved to a position that didn't require speaking because they stuttered. And so I guess based on other people's experiences, I don't think it's unreasonable to be suspicious that some of my experiences were the result of discrimination.
See, and many of my guests that I have asked them previously, there's no way of hard evidence, but I think we all have that intuition that you are the most qualified. You have all the skills, you have all of the experience, you have everything. And yet they hire a person who, doesn't even know how to type, doesn't know how to do a spreadsheet, doesn't know how to organize an event. And so, I mean, my high school counselor had told me, during all my testing that, my career would be data entry. There's no human interaction. They just give you the work, and so you have a full 8 hours to have it done, and that's it. I said, oh, that's great. Thank you. Do you think that it's a good idea to disclose before a job interview? I'm just curious.
I do. I think in general that the safer you can make a space for stuttering, the easier it'll be to speak in that space. And so I think one way that we can control that as stutterers is by disclosing and being open about it. And so on on interviews, I always bring it up. I think, on interviews where I wasn't applying for a position as a speech language pathologist, it's a bit more awkward because stuttering isn't really what you're talking about. But I think just letting people know ahead of time, oh, by the way, I have a stutter. You might notice it when I'm talking. If you have any questions about it, feel free to ask me. Something nice and simple like that can really, one, let the person know that you're not nervous, right? The way that you're talking isn't because you're underqualified or you're worried. It's just how you talk. And two, personally, and I don't think this is unique to myself, it's easier for me to stutter openly and easily if the person I'm speaking to already knows that I have a stutter. If they don't, that old habit of trying to hide it keeps trying to poke back up. And so I try to tell people if I can.
You bring up a very good point, because I cannot hide my stutter. It's right there. It's what you're going to hear. And I had job interviews where I would hyperventilate. They would hand me a paper bag, and there have been job interviews where I was not able to say hello. And so I was heavy breathing, and the looks that you get from, corporate type individuals. Here I am, heavy breathing. It's just not a good look, Chris. Right. And so I have had just horrible job interviews. However, later in life, I realized stuttering doesn't define who I am. This is just what I have. I'm Pedro and he stutters. Okay. Life goes on. And so I had created a wonderful icebreaker. It's worked every single time, Chris. I kid you not. It's amazing. Okay. So when I walk into a job interview, okay, I don't have anxiety or fear. Those are gone because 35 years of stuttering, I'm tired. You know what? I'm exhausted. And so, during a job interview, I just hop in, I smile, I have a firm handshake. I shake all of their hands. I greet them. And then as we all take our chairs, I just say, I am Pedro Pena. I have a stutter. Therefore, if I should have a block, give me 4 hours and the word will come out. And they all laugh. I said, good, I got them. It's all good.
I like that a lot.
It has worked every time, Chris. So, you can borrow it, just, FYI. So yeah, it's all good. But that just let me get it out there. Once that was out there, oh man, Chris, I gave them all of my KSAs, my knowledge, my skills, and my abilities. I was just rocking and rolling with all my experience. And when it was all over, it's like, wow, those 30 minutes just flew by. So, that has helped me out a great deal to just disclose.
Do you think high school Pedro would have been able to do that?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't think so. During school time, you are in survival mode. So all that I wanted to do was just go to school, do the whole 8 hours, come straight home, go to my room, lock the door, be in the darkness, and just pray that the next day will be better. And now that I'm older, now that I've had all of this therapy, now that I finally, at the age of 40, I told myself, I love you. I love you, Pedro. You are awesome. You do have a stutter, but oh well. The world isn't going to stop because you can't say your name. It is all good from here on out. And those people who mock you and tease you, that's on them. That is on them. There is a great quote by Les Brown. And so he states, don't let the opinions of others become your reality. And that's the truth.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, so let's talk about everyday daily activities. Okay, so we are in this pandemic. Okay, it's a whole new normal. How did you handle telephones and restaurants pre-pandemic and then during this pandemic?
So I think telephones still are not my favorite thing in the world. And I know that's not unique, not only not unique to me, but not unique to stutterers, right? Lots of fluent people don't really like the telephone either.
Right.
I find my stuttering's a bit more difficult on the telephone. I'll procrastinate making phone calls, but it's not to the point where it's a problem, right? I make the phone calls I need to make. I'm an adult. I'm a father. I joke to myself that I can't be scared of a phone if I'm going to raise a child, right? So it's
exactly.
Not,
yeah.
it's not that big of a deal. It's just one of those things I'm just not very fond of doing. And so the pandemic, though, in terms of my daily life, I don't know that I'm necessarily having to make that many more phone calls. All of my, it seems like most things are over Zoom now in terms of my job, right? So I'm teaching over Zoom. I'm holding meetings over Zoom. I'm doing therapy over Zoom. And Zoom to me is a bit easier than the telephone because you have that visual aspect. I think the hardest thing stuttering-wise about the pandemic has been stuttering with a mask on. That when you're in person and you're stuttering, it's almost that same feeling as being on the phone, where the person doesn't know if you're talking or not, if you're blocking, right? And they're just looking at you and you're looking at them, and it's like you don't see that my mouth is open and I'm trying to get a sound out right now. And so there's that additional layer of confusion that it introduces into the conversation.
See, and now that the face-to-face human interaction has moved to Zoom and Skype and Teams, it has just pushed a lot of people who stutter out of their comfort zones. And so one thing that I had to do was I had to learn how to work on these new platforms because I never used them previously, ever. So I would contact my buddies and say, let's practice. And so we would practice over, Zoom and Skype and Teams. That way, when I had to do it, there was a familiarity. Plus, I still would belly breathe and still disclose, because you have those handful of people, Chris. I don't know if this has happened to you, but you have those handful of people who are very vocal. When I'm having a block, they will say, "Hey, maybe that's his Wi-Fi. Maybe he has this cable company and they're horrible, or this cable company, his screen just froze." It's like, no, I'm just having a block.
Yeah, I think though that that used to happen to me on the telephone all the time, right? Is I'd be talking to somebody and they'd say, I think you have a bad connection. And
oh my
I'd
gosh.
have to tell them, no, I'm stuttering. Please just bear with me. This is just how it's gonna sound from here on out. It's not a bad connection. I hear you perfectly fine. I'm just stuttering. I used to live in Memphis when I was working on my PhD, and there was the Mexican restaurant right across the street from my building. And I used to order lunch there from time to time. And I remember one time, they usually were very pleasant to call. I remember one time the woman manning the phone just kept hanging up on me. And I kept calling back, and she kept saying, "Sir, you have a bad connection, click." And I kept calling back, and she click, click, and I kept saying, "Hold on, hold on, no, wait, it's just my stuttering." And I never got my taco. I just couldn't get through to her.
See, and that is a major crime, Chris. Everyone should have their taco.
Right, I agree.
That is terrible. I mean, there have been just many times where, I will heavy breathe over the telephone. I have a hard time with H's, or just basically the whole alphabet. But my H's, they're a little bit more extreme. And so here I am making a phone call, trying to say hello, and I'm like, and the other person on the line says, "I am going to call the cops right now."
I have a funny story about that. It's not my own story. A friend of mine from when I was in Memphis, he was an older gentleman who stuttered. He was maybe a couple years ago, he was maybe in his 80s, and we had an adult treatment and support group that he would always come to, and he would tell funny stories about his stuttering. And he tells this story, and I'm going to get some of the details wrong, and he tells it better. But when he was in
it's
college,
all good.
He was in college, and back then there was one phone per the floor of the dorms. So if you wanted to call somebody on that floor, or if you want to call somebody who lived there, you would call the floor. Somebody would pick up. You would tell them who you wanted to speak to, and they would go and get that person. Which, for a stutterer, sounds like a nightmare, right? And so he had been. There was this girl that he was interested in, and they had been talking and hanging out, and she gave him the phone number for where she lived, and said, give me a call. They were going to go out that weekend, and so the weekend's approaching, and he calls to set up the date, and somebody else answers, and he's trying to say hello, and he just does exactly what you were describing, right? Just sort of breathing really heavily. And the girl on the other phone yells to all of the floor mates, he's calling again, and then she hangs up. Apparently there was some creep who had been doing that, and he never called back. He never got that date.
Oh man. These are the days of our lives.
Right.
Do you think that it's a given that people who stutter should have a thick skin?
I think it certainly helps, right? I don't know that we all do, but I think it helps. I think also, in order to deal with your own thoughts and emotions surrounding stuttering, you have to learn to deal with other people's thoughts and emotions around stuttering. And I think a lot of that has to do with just not caring about what other people think. And if you don't have a thick skin, I think that's really hard.
See, and you bring up a great point, because before I turned 40, I worried about what everyone thought. I mean, I took everything in, and that would make me, angry and agitated and frustrated. It would make me depressed. However, after I turned 40, that's when I had told myself, that's it. I'm done. I don't care what you think about my stutter, because Pedro is awesome. And once I did that, Chris, I kid you not, everything left me. All of the guilt, all of the shame, all of the embarrassment, everything. It was all gone. I mean, this was like a whole new world had just opened up before my eyes. From that day onward, it was just awesome. Because I love Pedro. Pedro is confident. Pedro stutters, but he's still confident. So it's all good because Pedro's awesome. And so that has really, helped me out tremendously. That's why I have a YouTube. That's why I have a podcast. What I wanted to do was to just give back, to let other people who stutter know that they are not alone, and that they're #awesome. They're #phenomenal. Because what I believe is that people who stutter, we are extremely creative. We are extremely courageous, resilient. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been knocked down. I get back up. I get knocked down again. I get back up. And, so that's why I have this podcast and these awesome guests like you to just let the whole world know that we're awesome. So, yeah, thank you for that.
You asked me earlier what something I would tell parents and teachers. And I think that's something else I try to harp on a lot is when I say we, I mean as a culture, as a society, we stereotype people who stutter as anxious and nervous and weak. But actually, that kid is super brave, right? Just the fact that he's getting up every day and going to school and talking and continuing day in and day out to do that, you have a courageous child.
Exactly. So, had you ever experienced depression in due to your stutter?
I can't say that I did. I certainly had fears and worries and low points in my life, but I don't think I would ever say I felt depressed.
What I tell a lot of people who stutter is that if you are going through a dark period, please reach out. There are a lot of amazing stuttering organizations. Just Google them, because it is extremely important that we have a person to talk to during those dark days. So.
Yeah, and I would also add that, you don't have to add insult to injury, in that, just like stuttering's okay, like struggling with your stuttering is also okay. Experiencing depression, you don't need to experience shame on top of that, right? That reaching out is so very important.
Right. Now, you are over the age of 21, and so I don't know if you have ever experienced this, but when Pedro has 2 drinks, I mean, I'm doing great, Chris. I'm doing great. There is no stutter at all. I mean, I'm just having the best time of my life. And then afterwards, here comes Pedro. So, have you ever experienced that as well?
So, I don't know that I've experienced noticeable changes in my fluency, like just on a couple of drinks. But I do know that in college, I was a bit of a binge drinker, and I think one of the reasons for that was that if I drank enough, I stopped thinking about it. I stopped thinking about stuttering, and I could be as social as I wanted to be. It's like I had these shackles on me all the time, and I couldn't talk to the people I wanted to talk to. I couldn't say the things I wanted to, and when I drank enough, all those shackles went away. Now, at that point, I was usually fairly inebriated, and so I don't really know if I was fluent or not. I certainly felt like I was, but I'm not confident that I couldn't really tell you honestly if I stuttered less, but I certainly felt more able to speak to people. Now, just as a disclaimer, I think that was a very poor way of dealing with my stuttering. It certainly wasn't sustainable or healthy. And I think I was just in a fairly low place in terms of my comfort level. In terms of, like, if I have a couple of drinks, do I think I stutter any differently? I don't know. Not that I've really noticed.
Um, we we all have that common denominator that we have a stutter. However, our journeys are, somewhat different. And so half of the people who stutter that I pose this to, half have told me that it helps, and then half had told me that it just makes it worse. And so this is not a good way to cope with it. And many people have told me, Pedro, it would be a good idea to have you drink every hour on the hour. I said, no.
Just like one the drink just to take the edge off.
Yes, 1 per hour. No, thank you. That's not going to work for Pedro. Now, Chris, let's talk about secondaries. Because, let me tell you, I have a toolbox of 35 years, Chris. I've done everything to help me get out of a block, to help me with a repetition. Do you use those to help you as well?
So my strategy with my stuttering, for the most part, has been to do my best to not add anything extra to my speech. So my thought process as I'm stuttering is usually, what am I doing that's getting in the way of the sound or the word that I want to be saying right now? And so what I mean by that is, am I sometimes when I'm stuttering, I'll be like holding an extra sound that's not in the word. Like I'll have like a starter sound going on, like or something. And so I know I can't say the sound of the word that I want to say as long as I'm saying that sound that's not even in the word. Right? So that's a behavior that I'm trying to peel back. I try to keep my stuttered speech as similar to my fluent speech as possible. So trying not to add any extra behaviors in there, because I want to think about stuttering as little as possible, right? I just want to be like sort of just talking and letting it go and letting stutters happen as they happen. And then when I get stuck, if I get stuck, usually my strategy is to exert volition in that moment of stuttering, right? So usually, like, you get stuck and you're holding some sort of articulatory posture. So you're either stuck, like making the same sound over and over again. You're stuck with a lot of tension in one spot and you're not getting any sound out at all. You're stuck sort of in a fairly consistent posture usually. And so what I try to do is stutter on, like I tell myself, stutter on the sound of the word you want to say. So if I'm blocking, instead of blocking, can I stutter on the next sound, the sound that's coming up? If I'm stuck in a repetition, can I stutter? I've already said that sound. Can I stutter on the next sound in the word? And so I think my personal strategy with my own speech is to try to keep things as simple as I can and not add anything to it.
That is a good point, many of the behaviors that I have used, temporary ones,
Mm-hmm.
but the one that has helped me the most, that, I'm still practicing because, even though I'm 50 years old, I'm still learning. And so it's diaphragmatic breathing. That has helped me tremendously, during a block. That way, I don't have to pull out of my toolbox, tapping my head or tapping my leg or doing a horrible accent, which, I apologize to both England and Australia because it's just horrible. And so one other thing that I have added is mindful meditation. Granted, I'm still learning it, but with that and my belly breathing, that has proven to be very beneficial. I mean, to my whole life. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think any contemplative practice is really helpful. That anything that allows you to better pay attention to the present moment without reacting to it will help you to, when a moment of stuttering occurs, lessen those sort of habitual stereotyped reactions that we all develop over time, and therefore lessen our tension and make working through those moments of stuttering quicker and easier.
Right. I mean, you are 100% correct. And so here is a hot topic, Chris. We have, a couple of hot topics to cover, but here's the first one. And so let me ask you, Chris. So do you let others finish your sentences?
I don't. But I can't say. I think typically the nature of my stuttering is it doesn't happen to me as often as it used to. Let me just put it that way. But it's not something that I enjoy or that I like. Some people who stutter I've talked to find it a great relief when people finish their words for them or fill in the sentence for them so they don't have to say it. But I find if somebody does that, I just say it anyway, right? Because I feel like, one, they often get it wrong or not quite right. And
Exactly.
yeah. And two, I've been fighting so hard to say that word. I want to say it, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not done yet. Like I didn't put all this spit and sweat into this just to not say it.
Exactly. Let me have my voice, please.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think is the role of the other person within the context of having a conversation? Because what we perceive them thinking about it is, quite different. So what do you think is the role of the other person in a conversation with you?
You mean how do they affect me, or like what they should be doing?
What they should be doing. For example, having good eye contact,
Mm-hmm.
not turning as I'm having a block for like a minute.
Yeah, I think in the same way, you were just asking me like what like some of the things I do to work through my moments of stuttering, and I said, I just try to react to them as little as possible. I think I want my listening partner doing the same, right? React to
Right.
them as little as possible, right? Just stay with me. If we're already making eye contact, keep making eye contact. I also think, like, don't be scared of them. Sometimes we stutter in really funny ways, and I think it's okay to, like, find humor in it as long as you're not making fun of me,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
Like if if I ruin the punchline of a joke, or I stutter and it makes it sound like I said something different than what I was originally going to say, and that something different happens to be humorous. Like, I think, stuttering doesn't have to be so serious all the time. That one of the nice things about it is it sometimes injects humor into situations where there wouldn't be humor, and I want my listener to be relaxed enough that they can appreciate that with me.
See, and that is a great point because, now I use humor. I love humor. Never had it before. Pre-40, Pedro was always angry and had ulcers and agitated, had migraines. But, post 40, I mean, Pedro's having a great time in life. Now I can, have a chuckle or two because I can never get the punchline of a joke. I mean, that's just, the cold, hard truth. And so I just, I just go with it.
Yeah, I think humor is important, and this was actually something I was interested in from a research perspective. Is that's something I've noticed in therapy is as people manage their stuttering more how they want as they move further in their journey, old experiences that used to be painful sometimes become humorous, or they're able to find the funny in them. And something I've been curious about is whether humor is an accelerant of the process, right? If people with good senses of humor tend to have better outcomes, or if it's the other way around, and just people who have made more progress are more likely to find humor in their situations, right? If it's not, humor is not protective, it's just evidence that you've gone a certain distance.
See, and that is extremely interesting because I believe I am the first part of that. Yeah.
That you've used it to help you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So have you ever experienced that negative self-talk?
Yeah, certainly. I think much more when I was younger. A lot of it when I was younger, just like a constant voice of what I couldn't do or wouldn't be able to do or wouldn't be able to accomplish. I think for better or for worse, there was also this other voice that was like very stubborn and angry that like was felt that felt like I had failed if I ever let stuttering beat me. And so there was sort of this voice of doubt, this voice of maybe that was overly concerned that I wasn't going to be able to accomplish things I wanted to. And then this other voice that somehow knew that my psychological health was in the balance and that I had to make it through, because if I didn't, there would be consequences. And so there was this sort of like just grin and bear it in mentality of, I'm just going to stumble through life and not think about it as much as possible. And I don't think that's the best way to handle anything, right? I think sometimes you have to think about things and realize why you're having trouble and deal with it. But I think it did get me through some tough situations and times in my life. And eventually I was in a place where I could let in a bit more introspection.
See, and I mean, you just bring up all these great points, because I had one for 35 years. And later in life, later in therapy, one of my therapists had told me, just give it, give it a name, because once you name it, you don't let it, control you anymore. And so I called mine Oscar the Grouch. So when he would rear his ugly head, tell me, no, I can't do this. Don't even attempt it. I would just tell him to, hush up politely. And the mother voice, well, but there were many times when Oscar would win, and that's when, I felt just horrible. Just worthless and horrible. However, that other voice, you have to do this. You have to do this, because if you don't, it'll get harder the next time, and then the next time. For example, the telephone. The telephone was my nemesis for 2 decades. However, I told myself, I have to work on this, because I have to get a job. I will have to use it in my career. And so I hopped on eBay. I purchased an office telephone that looked just like the ones that we had in the office. And so I would practice every day. I would draw on my high school thespian history, and just, practice making phone calls and practice receiving phone calls. And so I did this for months and months and months. And then after a certain point in time, it became boring. It became boring. No more anxiety, no more fear. It's only a telephone. It's a piece of plastic with wires. Why am I letting this have a huge control over my life? And once it became boring, I had to test it in a real world application. And so when I was at work in the office, the telephone would ring. I didn't skip a beat. I picked up that phone. Hi, good morning. It's Pedro. How may I help you? And that's when I said, okay, I had this huge challenge, and then I practice. And then now I am good to go. And so many people tell me that, practice makes perfect, but I don't believe in perfection. What I believe in is that practice makes permanent. Now, I love the phone. I hop on the phone. I call everybody and anybody, but there was a time when that other voice, would tell me, you have to do this. Your life, your whole career depends on it. So, yep.
Yeah, and it also shows you how malleable our fears are, and our desires are, and our emotions are. Obviously, it's not easy work, right? Like that was hard, and
it was extremely hard,
and you had to do it consistently, repetitively, day in and day out. But it wasn't an intrinsic part of who Pedro is, right? You were
right?
able to change it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you, I mean, you were talking about the power of the F word, but the other F word, fear, fear, that had complete control over my entire life. Chris, I kid you not. Fear made me change my major in college because I was pre-law, and fear made me change it. And so, I chose psychology because, because I can help people in a different way. However, I've always wanted to be a lawyer, but fear told me that I can't do it. So, yeah.
I think part of the way I was coping was that I had convinced myself that everything was okay, right? I had convinced myself that stuttering wasn't a problem. And that other voice I was talking about, I think why it was so aggressive and why it would push me so hard was because if I let stuttering get in my way, then that lie I was telling myself was laid bare, and I would realize that stuttering was a problem and that it wasn't okay and that things were holding me back. And so I needed to delay that reckoning for as long as possible.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's a power struggle that we go through on a daily basis, on a minute by minute basis. It's real. The struggle is real. That's what people tell me. It is real. Okay, now here is another head scratcher. Okay, so I ask all my guests, and all of the responses are split right down the middle. And so let me ask you, Chris, when you are alone, can you speak without stuttering?
Yeah, I almost never stutter when I'm by myself. I might stutter if I'm by myself, if I'm rehearsing something that I'm going to say in front of other people. Although that's a rare situation. Like I don't rehearse much. But like if I'm in the car talking to myself, or in the shower talking to myself, or on a walk and just, like muttering, I'm entirely fluent.
See, and that's when I am your opposite. Well, I mean, day by day, who knows? But there are times when I'm just all by myself and I'm talking to myself, as we all do. No judging. And so I will be just answering myself, and I'll have a block, I'll have a repetition, but half of my guests have answered, they don't, and then half they do. So it's just very interesting.
Yes, stuttering's super weird.
You got that right, Chris. Okay, now, do you feel that your stutter gets worse if you're tired or stressed out, or just plain? You are just drained.
Yeah, I would say like any sort of stress, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, my stuttering generally is more frequent and more difficult. I would say when it's most noticeable is when I'm like physically fatigued, like if I just got done exercising or something. I'm probably gonna stutter a bit more. Um, but also, if I'm in a very emotional situation, like at a funeral or something like that, where I've just been crying a lot, I'm generally more disfluent. I also think though that sometimes it just feels random, like that my variations aren't maybe as predictable as I think they are. That when I expect it's going to be worse, it isn't, and when I expect it's going to be better, it isn't.
And that also applies to me because it's random. I mean, there are days when I'm great with my H's. I mean, in any situation, I'm fantastic. But other times, randomly, no. Heavy breathing, call the cops, It's what happens to me. Okay, now here, so has this ever happened to you? Let's say you are, you have a doctor's appointment and you hop into the office. There's an admin person and they greet you and they ask you for your name and then you have a long block and the admin person is watching you and then they respond, "Did you forget your name?" Has that ever happened to you, Chris?
Many, many times.
How do you handle it?
It depends. I think how I'm feeling and what the nature of the interaction feels like. Um, so I almost always respond with humor. So usually I'll chuckle along with them. Um, then, depending on how I'm feeling, I might just let it go. Or I might say, no, actually, I have a stutter. Um, and but the reason I don't always say that is not because I'm embarrassed. It's because then they apologize profusely, right? They're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," and
Exactly.
like I'm not that offended. Like I've gone through it so many times, it's not that big of a deal, and I just don't want to deal with your apologies right now.
Over and over and over
Right.
and over again. Yes. Yeah. That has happened to me. I mean, good Lord, my whole life. And the old Pedro, you know, um, you know, there was anger, but the new Pedro, I mean, it's like, look, it's okay. I just have a stutter. My eyes may um close when I have a block. My arms might go all over the place. It's just me. I just have a stutter. And then they go, "Oh, my uncle stutters or my
Right.
neighbor stutters, my dad stutters." I said, "You know what? It's all good."
Yeah.
Because I believe the best way for me is to just take the time and educate, because for the next time that it happens, they'll be better prepared. So, uh, so, so you know, so, so I find myself like on a daily basis, I'm educating people at Walmart, at Target,
Yeah.
at the grocery store.
I think, Pedro, that's the right thing to do. I think sometimes I'm just lazy. And I don't want to do that.
I hear you. I mean, because this is a lot of work, Chris.
Right. And I think for me, I spend so much of my day, my work day, thinking about stuttering, right? I'm teaching classes, I'm doing therapy, I'm writing, doing research, that when I'm not at work, like I don't want stuttering. I don't want to be thinking about it, right? And so there's sort of a stuttering fatigue that happens.
See, and I mean, you know, a lot of people don't know what we go through on a daily basis. From the moment I wake up until the moment I lay my head down on the pillow, all of my organs are active. Everything's active. I mean, from the time that I leave the house, Pedro is on. Then by the end of the day, I'm exhausted. I'm drained. I don't have any energy left for anybody. I just plop on the couch and, I just enjoy the silence.
Yeah, it's a lot of work stuttering.
Okay, so here's another hot topic. Okay, so I love this one because we're all here to learn. So, dating. As you know, dating is hard for a lot of people. But for us, it's like a million times more difficult. How did you handle dating with having a stutter?
I think it was hard. And I think the hard part was sort of that. I think the hardest part was that it, initial approach, right? That it just felt harder to meet people who weren't already in your friend group, just because you didn't want your first impression to be stuttering, but it had to be, right? Like there was no way around
Exactly.
that. And so I think, but like, I want to be careful how I say this. I think there is real stigma in society around disabilities and around stuttering. And so I don't think it's a unreasonable reaction to their stuttering that many people try to hide it and try to minimize it, because I don't think it's wrong that they might be judged for it. That said, I think the only way we're going to tackle that stigma is to do what you said you've been doing, right? You have to be open about it and you have to educate people.
Exactly.
And I think that stigma is not very deep, right? It isn't like racism, right? It's more surface level. And so I think challenging it is actually a little bit easier. And when you do it, I think people are very open to having their minds changed. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, listen, if you're a person who stutters and you feel like you can't stutter because of prejudice, you're not wrong. But also, I think your life would be better if you just pretended there wasn't prejudice and stuttered your heart out, right? That just go out, talk to people, and some people will react poorly, but you don't really need them, right? There's
Right.
other people, and not all of your reactions are going to be negative, and during that process, you'll be lessening the prejudice, because you'll be showing people that people who stutter are just normal people, just like everybody else, and they're smart, and they're funny, and they're beautiful.
Exactly. Because, Nike has a great marketing, just do it, just do it over and over and over again. Then let's say you get rejected. Well, guess what? You try again. And then you get rejected. Guess what? You try again. So, we don't give up. We are very resilient.
Yeah, and so to go back to your question about dating, I think like initially asking out a girl who I didn't know very well was always really hard. But I thought once you got to the first or second interaction, that then stuttering didn't play as big of a role anymore. That it had like that bridge had been crossed. The fact that she's seeing me again means that she doesn't care about the stuttering very much, so I can just let it go.
Right. I mean, you are 100% correct. And then also, stuttering lets you know who is worthy of your time.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that, because those who just look at their watch, as I'm having a block, I mean, those who are just looking up and looking down, I know that person is not worthy of my time. So I'm not going to, further my time with you, because you aren't worthy of Pedro's time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, next. Okay, so what do you think about all? Okay, what do you think about all this new technology? You have Google Home, you have Alexa, then you have Siri. Do you think that all this new technology is helpful or hurtful for people who stutter?
I think like all technology, it depends on how you use it, right? That technology is a tool. It's sort of a neutral thing, and if you use it to exacerbate your bad habits, right? If you use it to avoid things that you're already avoiding, like if you text instead of call and you never really face up to those fears,
Exactly.
then yeah, I think it can probably collude with the issues you're already having and make things worse. At the same time, there's things that are really convenient about technology and make things easier, and I think we should avail ourselves of them. The voice technology is interesting because it doesn't always recognize stuttering, and I know that companies are working on that. I received an email a couple months ago from a company who's doing some machine learning stuff, trying to work with people with various speech impediments. And so it's certainly an area that companies are trying to improve on. But as it stands right now in January 2021, they don't handle stuttering very well. And so it's, I don't want to like it's that's discriminatory in a way, but the technology just isn't there yet, right? And so I don't think it's personal, right? It's not targeted at us. I think it will be there eventually.
Right. There are 2 points that I want to make. The first one is many of the responses have been that they use this new technology to just practice.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's not a human, it's a machine. It's devoid of all devoid of, emotions. Therefore, they can just, call it up and just practice. Then also, there were two universities that reached out to me, two studies, and so both of these colleges, they are in the process to create a let me see, a product for for people who stutter, giving us more time to respond, because as you know, they only give you like 1 or 2 seconds to respond. That's
Pedro,
when
I've been timed out of voicemails so many times.
Welcome to my world.
You're like, you hear the beep and you're trying to leave a message and you're just blocking, and then it comes back on and it's like, if you would like to leave a message, please press star, and you're like, I'm trying.
Give me more time. Please give more time. And so, thankfully, they are working on this new technology. So, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so what is a challenge speech-wise that you had to overcome, and how did you do it?
That's a good question. So when I was first in graduate school, I was going to graduate school for speech language pathology. It was my first semester. I was in my clinical placement at a local hospital, and I was doing inpatient swallowing evaluations. And so for your listeners who don't really know what that is, speech language pathologists also work with swallowing disorders, because you use the same anatomy and physiology for speaking as you do for swallowing. And so a lot of times when patients enter hospitals, especially if they've had a head injury or a stroke, the doctors don't really know yet if it's safe for them to eat, or whether they will aspirate on food and drink. So aspirate means that the food and drink will enter the lungs. And so that can be really dangerous. And so typically when a patient enters the hospital, a speech language pathologist will stop by their room and give them a quick swallowing evaluation, just to make sure it's safe for them to eat. And so that's what I was doing. And my stuttering was perhaps at one of its most difficult points in my life. I had these really long struggled blocks, and just a lot of stopping and starting, a lot of interjections, like I couldn't make eye contact. And so what this looked like is, I was in my little white lab coat and my clipboard. I had my clipboard in hand, and I would go into this patient's room, who was usually slightly disoriented, right? Because they just had a stroke or just got into a car accident or something. There was a reason why I was seeing them.
Right.
Usually they had some kind of a head injury or brain injury. And I would walk up to the bed, and I would start trying to explain to them that my name was Chris. I was their speech language pathologist, and I would be giving them a swallow evaluation. And how that came out was, hello, hello, my name is hello, my name is Chris, and so on and so forth like that. And I got through with them, but it was really hard, and communicating with the patients was really hard, and I had to give this what they called the mini mental state exam, which is a very quick screening for sort of a patient's mental state, like whether they're oriented and or if there's something that we should be worried about. And so I'd be giving them this quick little exam where like they really have to be paying attention and like listening to what I'm trying to say. And I know all of those initial ones were not valid because they were so distracted by my speaking, and I was so nervous and like sweating through my clothes and spitting everywhere. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and eventually my supervisor pulls me aside and asks me, Chris, seems like you're having a really hard time. And I said, yeah, I'm having a really hard time. And he said, I'm not, stuttering's not really my area, right? Swallowing is my specialty area. So I'm not really sure what we can do. Do you have any ideas? And I told him, I don't, this is just how I've always talked. If I could do something about it, trust me, I would be doing something about it. I sort of, up until that point, was using the grit your teeth strategy, right? I was just going to get through this. I was going to pretend nothing was wrong and just keep struggling ahead. And he said to me, I think it might help the patients if while you were stuttering, you continued to make eye contact. I think they'd be less confused if you just kept eye contact with them the whole time. Do you think you can do that? And I told him, I think that's something I can work towards. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it right away, but I think that's a reasonable thing to try. And so by the end of the semester, a couple of months later, I was making eye contact with my patients. And it was hard, right? I automatically, when I started stuttering, I would look up. And so at first, I was just catching myself looking up and then bringing my eyes back down, catching myself looking up and bringing my eyes back down. Eventually, I could catch it faster, so my eyes would start going up. Then I would bring them down, right? Eventually, I felt them begin to start to go up, and I wouldn't even let them. And then eventually, I wasn't trying to look away anymore. And that was the first, that made me realize I didn't have to stutter the way I had been, right? That all of these behaviors, all these things that I do, they're not inherent to my stuttering. These are things that I'm doing, and I can do things differently. And so I think that just started me on my journey of really working on my speech and trying to peel back, like I was talking about earlier, peel back all these things that I'm doing. Like just pick one at a time. And it might take 6 months to work on one behavior. Like it's not easy. But just slowly and consistently peeling back these things that I'm doing that make speaking harder. So yeah, I think my challenge was talking to my patients, and my solution was taking it one step at a time and being very patient with myself.
That is awesome. That's one thing that I am still working on is, keep the eye contact. And so, that behavior, I just need to just work on it.
It's really hard, so, just be kind to yourself, right? And it's not the end of the world if you break eye contact, but it's definitely something you're in control of.
Right. Yeah. Great point. Now, you have alluded to this previously, but I think I know the answer, but let me just ask this anyway. So, do you think that it is okay to stutter, or is it important to keep chasing those fluency gods?
I think not only is it okay to stutter, but the harder you chase fluency, the more elusive it will be. Right? That speaking with a stutter is kind of like falling asleep, right? Like you can't just sit down and say, I'm going to fall asleep, right? Like you can't make yourself fall asleep. The harder you try to fall asleep, the more awake you're going to be, right? It's more like you set the stage so that you can just let it happen, right? And the more okay you are with stuttering, the more comfortable you are with it, the less it bothers you, the less you react to it. I think the more you want to stutter, then you'll have the easiest time speaking, right? That it's actually when you let go of all of that speech becomes easier. So not only is it okay to stutter, but I think chasing fluency is counterproductive.
See, and that took me the longest time to learn, is to just let it go. And just, you just said it perfectly. Once I let it go, it was a non-issue. I still went, to the restaurant, I still went through that drive-through because, it's okay. I'm cool. Pedro's awesome. Life goes on. Now, what has your stutter taught you?
So that's a really interesting question. And it's one I think about a lot, especially in terms of my therapy with other people, because like we were just talking about, I think the more you can let yourself stutter, the easier it is. And so if you can find a reason to stutter, I think stuttering becomes easier. So something I sort of harp on a lot about in therapy is figure out what you gain by stuttering. Like what does it add to your life? And for me, something that I realized is that a moment of stuttering is a moment of intimacy with the person I'm speaking to. That in order for me to stuttering, being stuck in your speech is a very vulnerable spot to be in. And so when I'm speaking to somebody and I get stuck, they're witnessing me in a vulnerable state, and that vulnerability injects an intimacy into that situation that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And I'm convinced that just by stuttering, I can have a deeper connection with somebody just because we both witnessed me in this vulnerable spot. And so I think what my stuttering has taught me is that by letting it happen, by not fighting it, that rather than being a barrier to communication, it can actually facilitate it, because it tends to strip away all those facades that we put up, and it just allows people to be more honest and authentic.
That was just amazing. Wow. Many people tell me that their stutter is a curse. And what I believe, because I can only talk for Pedro, my stutter has been a blessing. It has taught me courage. It has taught me empathy, and many view it as a deficit, but for Pedro, this is my superpower, because what I have to say has value. And, those who appear to be not interested or whatnot, those people are no longer in my life. I only have people near me who are positive, who will lift me up. They aren't yes people. Okay. They have given me a good talking to every now and then. But what I have learned is that if you have positive people around you, you can do anything.
Yeah, and your stuttering is sort of like a spider sense in a way. Like, it allows you to filter those people out.
Oh my God. You are just right on target, Chris. Right on target. Okay, so what advice would you give to another person who stutters?
I think that's a big question. I think that it would really depend on what that person needed to hear. I think in general, it would be similar to what we were just talking about, that stuttering becomes easier when you have a reason to do it, and figure out what that reason is for you, right? You just talked about how it allows you to see who people really are, right? It sort of drips away their facades, and you can see whether you actually want to spend time with this person or if you don't. I was just talking about how it allows me to be vulnerable in a situation that might not have had space for that vulnerability, and how that increases the intimacy of the interaction. I have a client who says that stuttering helps him make friends because it always gives him something to talk about. He introduces himself and says, I have a stutter, and then they always ask him questions about it, and so it's really easy to make small talk. That if you figure out what stuttering does for you and stop trying to cut it out of your life, that if you can work with it, right, swim with the river rather than against it, that everything will be easier.
How cool. That is great advice. And if you had the opportunity to be on the world stage, okay, you were talking to the entire world, and giving them, you know, giving the world some insight as to stuttering. Okay, what message would you convey to the world?
I would want the world to know that, well, there's probably a lot of the world that has some crazy points of view about stuttering. So I would want to squash those really quick. Like, it's not contagious. You're not gonna catch it. It's not. Your child's not gonna learn it from me. All of those like myths about stuttering, I'd want to get rid of. But also just that, like we were talking earlier about advice for parents and teachers, that there's nothing wrong here, right? I know my speech sometimes might sound struggled, but that, that it's okay, and that what I need from you is just to listen and treat me like you would treat anybody else, and that stutterers are no different than anybody else. There's no quantitative difference in ability, other than ability to produce fluent speech, right? That we're just as intelligent, just as capable, and so just give us a chance.
That's an awesome message. I like that message. So let me tell the listeners how I found you, because it's very interesting. So there's a new app. It's called Clubhouse. Okay, it's a brand new platform. They only have it for those who have an Apple iPhone, and you must have okay, not that you must, but it's by invitation only. Those who don't have one, you can download the app and then be on a waiting list. And so, a couple of weeks ago, I was in a room, positivity and your mental health. And so this new Clubhouse app, it is only strictly audio. There's no texting, there's no video, it's just completely audio. And so I told myself, I need to push myself out of my comfort zone and just do it. And so I got the invitation, I downloaded it, I did my bio, and then my photo, and then I hopped into this room, positivity and mental health. And so on the lower right-hand corner, there is a picture of a hand. And so if you tap it, you are basically raising your hand to talk to the speakers, because there are two parts to a room. You have the speakers, and then you have the audience. And so the speakers were all, PhDs and therapists and, coaches and whatnot. And they wanted to find out how you handle mental health during this pandemic. And so I said, well, okay, let me just hit, tap that hand. And let me tell you, Chris, Oscar, he popped up a bunch of times. He said, don't do it. You will make a fool out of yourself. But I told Oscar, no, I need to do this. So I tap it, and then they bring me up to the speaker area. And then I tell them who I am. I have a stutter, plus I have a podcast. And so I tell them what I wanted to, convey. And so one of the speakers thanked me and told me it's awesome that we have neurodiversity here on this new platform. Okay, now I had never heard that term before, neurodiversity. And so what I did, I got out of the room, and so I Googled it. And the first thing that popped up is there is an article in The Pulse, and the title is, "For Some People Who Stutter, Fluent Speech is Overrated." So I read this article, then I go to page 4, and there's a picture of you, Chris. And so you are talking about neurodiversity. And so that extremely piqued my interest. I had to have you on this podcast. So can you please tell me about neurodiversity?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Neurodiversity is a concept that tries to move away from medicalized understandings of difference, right? So a lot of times different ways of being are seen as disorders, whether it's so neurodiversity really got started with people on the autism spectrum, people with ADHD and dyslexia, and the argument was that these present challenges in certain social arrangements, but that society is a factor here in our difficulties, that society is arranged in such a way as to accommodate the majority of people. But some of us have different makeups. We have different neurobiologies, and so we behave differently. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have a disorder. It just means that we aren't as taken into account by the way things are. And typically, neurodiversity advocates are very quick to recognize that with various different ways of being, there's challenges, right? That people with ADHD can very much have challenges concentrating with their attention, with distractions. But there's also gains to be had, right? That if you look at the research, there's also creativity there and spontaneity and joy. And the same could be said for a lot of various things that we consider disorders. And so what I was talking about at that conference was whether stuttering fit into this way of thinking. Right? Is stuttering entirely bad? Right? Is it simply a lack of fluency and an inability to speak properly? Or is it a valid way of speaking in its own, in which a lot of the challenges that come from stuttering come from interacting with a world that doesn't understand it, expect it, or accommodate it? And so I would argue that much of our difficulty comes from interacting with other people who just aren't expecting stuttering and don't really know how to interpret it. I do think that, and I don't want to diminish this, that there's inherent struggles that come with stuttering, right? Not being able to say what you want to say when you want to say it, and experiencing intense blocks and inabilities to move forward through speech. That would be hard in whatever world you're in, right? Even in the most perfect understanding society, that would be difficult. But
Right.
I do think that if we only think about stuttering as a disordered form of speech, we miss out on the full experience of it. That we actually have, because we've been so conditioned to see it as a medical issue and something that's bad, we have very little understanding of what might be good about it, right? That, we were just talking about various things, right? Intimacy, authenticity, stuff like that. And I encourage your listeners, think about it. If it's hard to think about what might be good about your stuttering, I think that's evidence that our thinking has been boxed in, that we've been so reflectively thinking about this as something bad that we've not even allowed our minds to wander about what we might like about it. And so I'm not trying to say that, nobody who stutters should go get speech therapy, that we don't need to work. I think trying to speak easier makes a lot of sense, right? I encourage people to speak as easily as they want to, or would like to be able to, but that let's broaden how we're thinking about this to include the vastness of our experiences, and not ignore when we have good experiences, not ignore all the times that stuttering is funny or adds texture to our lives or changes how we're understanding things.
Wow. That is fascinating, because in reading your, you've also written a book, right? Co-authored a book?
Yeah, co-edited books, Stammering Pride and Prejudice, where we're working with some of these ideas. It's every chapter is written by a different contributor, where they're sort of applying these ideas to their own stuttering and their own experiences.
The title is fantastic, because it is talking about a difference and not a defect, which I love.
Yeah. We wanted to reiterate that stuttering is a valid way to speak in and of itself, that you don't have to stop stuttering, that you could even want to continue stuttering, and that's okay too.
Right. We all have a voice, and our voice has value.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, you are a fellow podcaster. Talk about your podcast, because I'm curious.
So I'm a co-host on the StutterTalk podcast. I wouldn't call it my podcast. Peter Reitz is the guy who runs it. He's the president over at StutterTalk. I do interviews and I do recordings and whatnot. But all the behind the scenes stuff is all Peter. It's sort of a nice gig for me. All the responsibility of getting listeners and keeping it running and editing is all on Peter. Whenever I meet somebody interesting, I can interview them. So
That's a good gig.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So I would like to thank you, Chris. Thank you for being on this podcast, and thank you for sharing your journey, because I believe there's healing. There's healing in sharing your story, and so I want to thank you. Now I have amazing listeners. They are global. Let's say they wanted to reach out to you. What would be the best way?
So the best way would definitely be email. I'm not on social media, so you won't find me there. But you can certainly email me, and I always respond to my emails. You can email me at cconstantino@fsu.edu. That's my email, cconstantino@fsu.edu. And yeah, that's the best way.
How cool! We will have that link in the podcast notes. We will also have a link to the book, and then
excellent, thank you.
And then also it's all good. Teamwork makes the dream work. There will also be links to your research articles, which are fantastic, by the way. And so I just want to say that thank you for being a bright light out there for us. You are a true inspiration, and so I just want to say thank you. And so later on down the road, let's have another conversation. That way we can just keep it going, because my goal is to just raise awareness and let other people who stutter know that they are not alone, and that they're awesome and they're phenomenal. And that's why I do what I do. So thank you for everything.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, sir. Take care, be well, and stay safe.
All right.
If you like this podcast, head on over to Apple Podcasts, subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you for listening, and we will talk again.